Hello everyone, welcome back. This is SEC Fanatic and I'm here with this weirdo, Chris Willett. If you have not already realized him, or this is your first time watching, if you go back to my second episode, you would have seen him and he got to come on and talk a little bit about wrestling. And now he's in my house, in my studio house. He came in, he broke in, and now he's here to record a podcast with me. So we're going to be talking a little SEC football as this is going to be releasing the Thursday before football begins. Actually, college football will be starting tonight, the night that this releases, because the very first Thursday of the college football season will be August 30th, which will be today if you're watching this on Thursday. And Texas A&M is going to be playing Northwestern at 7:30 on the SEC Network. But before we dive into that, Chris, if you want to just have a little opening word here, how are you doing?
I am doing all right, Matthew.
Is your hair happy?
My hair is very happy.
Awesome. So getting into football, Texas A&M, Northwestern. Texas A&M last year in 2017 went 7-6, 4-4 in the SEC, and Jimbo Fisher is their new head coach. He came over from Florida State. He's never been a head coach at anywhere else aside from Florida State. And then again, Northwestern last year went 10-3, 7-2 in the Big Ten. So they actually didn't do that bad in the Big Ten. Chris, what are your thoughts and predictions on this game?
Jimbo Fisher is going to be bringing something new, transitioning from ACC to SEC. Because the play styles are slightly different because the SEC does tend to be the tougher conference to play in. But Northwestern has shown some good sides, both offense and defense, in the last few years. So I feel like it's going to be a close game, but Texas A&M are going to pull it out.
All right, what do you think the score is going to be?
It'll be within 2 touchdowns, likely within the 30s and 40s.
I'd have to agree. I think that I actually am one who thinks that Texas A&M will be really good this year if you just take a look at all the guys that they have coming back. But Northwestern did really good last year. And actually, when I looked them up, they kind of surprised me by how good they did in the Big Ten. But like Chris said, I think the SEC kind of trumps all. And so I'm going to take Texas A&M to win this one. High scoring again. I'm going to say 42-38. Just taking a shot in the dark. Moving on to Saturday, the very first Saturday of college football. That'll be September 1st. And the very first game that we're going to be talking about here is South Carolina versus Coastal Carolina. And that'll be at 11 o'clock on the SEC Network. Last year, South Carolina went 9-4, 5-3 in the SEC. And the big thing with South Carolina, the reason why a lot of people see them contesting with Georgia, is because they do have a lot of skill players returning. Their quarterback, who's from our town, Opelika. Yay, shout out. Jake Bentley. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, their quarterback's coming back. Deebo Samuels, their wide receivers coming back, and plenty of other guys. And so that's a big deal for South Carolina. And then for Coastal Carolina, last year they went 3-9, 2-6, and they're in the Sun Belt Conference. But the big thing for Coastal Carolina is that was their first year actually being a part of the FBS, the Football Bowl Division, because before they had been in the FCS, which is where the not-so-good teams play for college football. And so last year was their first year. Maybe one could say that 3-9 was a good score, but now they have their head coach back. He was sick last year. So their head coach is back. His name is Joe Moglia. So he's coming back. And Chris, do you think that having their head coach means that Coastal Carolina is going to beat South Carolina?
I doubt it's going to change the outcome of the game. I mean, it may add to maybe the morale of some of the older, juniors, seniors on the team, but the freshmen, sophomores that won't recognize him are going to be the ones that aren't as affected by his return. But going 3-9 the first year in the FBS is decent considering the skill level of teams and the increase that has as you switch from FCS to FBS. So I feel like it'll be a good game for South Carolina. It'll be a good way to open up the season, good way for the returning skill players to get back into the season, and likely a good way for the maybe kind of second strings backups to get warmed up just in case they're needed later in the year.
So what do you think as far as score-wise? What are you thinking?
At least probably a 24 point difference in the score.
I'd have to agree. I just think from a talent point, South Carolina is just yards behind, or beyond, not behind, beyond Coastal Carolina. Again, with this being their second year with the big boys, I'm going to have to go South Carolina for the win as well, and a pretty decent win. I'm going to go 28-6. Next game up, Ole Miss versus Texas Tech. That'll be 11 o'clock on ESPN, and this is a neutral site game. It's going to be played in Houston, Texas. Last year, Ole Miss went 6-6, 3-5. This is going to be the final year of their 2-year bowl ban, so Ole Miss cannot play in the SEC championship. Ole Miss cannot play a bowl game. They could have actually played a bowl game last year, but they had a bowl ban. So Texas Tech comes in 6-7. They lost their bowl game. They went 3-6, and they play in the Big 12. And they have a lot of uncertainty on offense. They had a lot of guys who came in and graduated or moved on to the NFL. And their head coach, job security is really not that great right now. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on this game?
I feel like there's several toss-ups for Texas Tech's offense with several of their starters graduating. So they're going to have difficulty really placing a starter, especially in the wide receiver position, because I noticed they have had a couple graduate, 3 or 4 graduate from wide receiver other skill positions on offense. So there's a good chance there's going to be several different toss-ups within the first 2-3 weeks of Texas Tech's season. Ole Miss, they went from having the ability and the skill level required to beat Alabama for years in a row, to barely being able to contend with Alabama, much less the rest of the SEC. They did all right overall in the season. The split record, it's decent. 3-5 in the SEC. From what Ole Miss was 2, maybe 3 seasons ago, that's a huge decline from what they have. So I feel like Ole Miss won't take the game by a large margin, but I feel like they will beat out Texas Tech.
Yeah, it's kind of a toss-up because, and I mean, that decline probably comes from the bowl ban itself. You know, a lot of players want to play for, a bowl game. At the very least a bowl game or, hopefully a championship. But these guys can't, and so that probably, we know that took a lot of their talent away in transfers. I agree, though. I have the feeling that since Texas, when you have a team that's very turmoily, that's a word, right? Maybe? No, probably not. But if you have a team that's very conflicted, then you usually have a hard time winning. And so I just think there are too many questions with Texas Tech to be able to say for certain this is what's going to happen with Texas Tech. So I'm going to take Ole Miss with a slight 3-point victory. Alrighty. So the next game we're going to take a look at is Central Michigan and Kentucky. It'll be at 2:30 on ESPNU. Kentucky will be hosting, and this is going to be in the afternoon. Don't worry, it won't be at 2:30 in the morning. Central Michigan, last year went 8-5, 6-2. They are in the Mid-American Conference, and Kentucky went 7-6, 4-4. And the big thing for Kentucky is they get the SEC's leading rusher back and Kentucky's all-time high touchdown scorer for rushing touchdown scores. They get their top running back, basically back, Benny Snell, and that's a big thing for Kentucky. Chris, what are your thoughts on Kentucky? Thoughts and predictions?
Kentucky's offensive line has really stepped up the last couple seasons from what I've watched, highlight reels, various things like that. And just from watching them playing general, they have a good center line. So the center and both guards they're high-quality players when it comes to playing on the offensive line. So their run game, especially with the running back coming back, is going to be really strong throughout the season. The passing game, that's all going to depend on the tackles and who they rotate in and out for tackles and who they have starting who plays games. Because blindside protection for Kentucky has been a little weak recently, so that's going to play a big factor in their success this year.
All right, so what's your prediction?
if you compare the records from last year, they're more or less even just because of the conference differences. But I'm going to have to say, I don't know, it could be a really close game. I don't think I can make a solid prediction yet.
Okay. I agree with, Central Michigan last year won one more game than Kentucky did. Kentucky has really been wanting to kind of turn things around, and I feel like this is the first year where they have the chance to do that. But like Chris said, this is a really toss-up game, but my gut feeling says Kentucky, but by really narrow margin. I feel like it's going to be the team that slips up first in this game that's going to be the one to lose. And so I'm going to say that whoever wins by 3 points or less?
Maybe 6.
6 points or less, like a 6-point margin between the two. But I'm going to side with Kentucky. All right, next game is probably the biggest game, in my opinion, here on the opening weekend for college, or maybe not for college football, but for at least the SEC. Washington versus Auburn at 2:30 on ABC in Atlanta. Washington last year went 10-3, 7-2, and they played in the Pac-12. And 75% of Washington's starters are returning, so a massive amount. They got their quarterback back, they got their running back back. Quarterback back. They got the running back back and the quarterback back. And then Auburn went 10-4, 7-1 in the SEC. And Auburn's big issue going into this season is going to be their O-line. They lost their center. They lost 4 out of 5 starters. They lost 3 really big ones in Casey Dunn, Braden Smith, and Austin Golston. And then they lost 1 more. And so they're left with 1 returning starter and lots of offensive linemen. So that's really, and they lost Kerryon Johnson, who was Auburn's workhorse at running back. So Chris, what's your thoughts on this game?
Washington did play in the Pac-12 last year, but had a run for the national title. They were considered for the playoffs multiple times. Eventually, actually, they did go to the playoffs, didn't they? But with that many starters returning, and then a record like 10-3 and then 7-2 in your conference will give a lot of players motivation for the next year. Like, we have to improve on that. Unlike a poor record in one year, we'll be like, we can't. There's not a good chance of us doing any better this year. I feel like the large number of starters returning and then the record from last year is going to really boost their confidence. Well, with Auburn keeping all their wide receivers, especially a deep threat here and there, Auburn's going to have a good passing game if Jarrett Stidham can keep cool under pressure. That's one problem Jarrett Stidham did have last year, is when the pressure really cracked down, maybe in-game type situations, Jarrett Stidham began to either slip or got really good. So it's kind of a toss-up with him. The offensive line situation for Auburn is going to be a big deal because this past year was the best offensive line that Auburn's had set up in a very long time. Well, there were several sacks in different games, especially the Clemson game last year. 11-12 sacks in a single game. Losing 4 starters on the offensive line is going to really hurt them offensively. But the defense for Auburn has a really good chance of staying strong this year. So I feel like their defense is what's going to save them this season. First, second quarter, I feel like Auburn is definitely going to come out strong. Around third quarter, Washington likely going to make some kind of return, maybe not catch up to Auburn all the way depending on the score. I feel like by fourth quarter, Auburn will pull it out just because they are high quality. Auburn is a high quality team. And this is going to allow them to really, they're going to have a lot of confidence going into this. And so I feel like Auburn will pull it out, and it will be a decent margin, maybe 14, 17 points.
I kind of agree. Again, these two teams were both in consideration for the playoffs last year. They both had very similar records. Auburn lost 1 more game. They both won 10 games. They both Washington lost their bowl. They both lost their bowl game actually, they're both from really strong conferences. This is just a game where you really could pick either, and I wouldn't think that someone picking either would be wrong or right. But I do have one interesting statistic here. Auburn has not won against a top 20 team since 1957 in week 1. So the numbers are not in Auburn's favor. Auburn's trying to turn that around with Gus Malzahn. So we'll see how that goes. I think that Auburn's defense will be too much. I went back and I watched how Penn State defense attacked Washington's defense, and it was very similar to how Auburn's defense will go. I think that this is a game where going into it, a lot of the hype is going to be around the offenses, but it ends up being all about the defenses and which defense is going to allow more points. And right now, I just see that Washington has lost too many guys on defense. Even though they've returned back so many people, I think that they've lost just a few more than Auburn has. I think that Auburn's front seven is too strong. And so I think that Auburn pulls out by a really, really, really narrow margin. All right, so next up is Georgia versus, the very famous Austin Peay. This will be at Georgia at 2:30 on ESPN. Austin Peay went 8-4 last year as an FCS team. So if you don't understand how all that kind of works, all the teams that you've kind of heard of, all the big conferences, they're all in what's called FBS. And then there's some lower teams like Jacksonville State's, the Austin Peays, who are lesser heard of, and those are called FCS teams. And so they went 8-4 there last year. Georgia went 13-2, 7-1 in the SEC, and they were SEC champions. The big question for Georgia is how do you replace key starters? Nick Chubb, the running back's a big one. Roquan Smith at linebacker is a huge one. They do return some good guys, though. What are your thoughts on that game? Close one, I know, right?
Yeah, it's Austin Peay, 8-4, decent. I mean, it's a winning record. It's a 4-game winning record. So it's a good record for an FCS team against other FCS teams. But Austin Peay coming against number 2 in the nation last year, made a run with Alabama for the national championship, beat Auburn in the championship, had a really good end of the year last year, mainly. And they started undefeated for 8 games last year? 6? I think it was 9. Yeah, I believe they were 9-0. I do feel bad for Austin Peay coming into this is not the best way for an FCS team to open up the season. Georgia, I can say for sure, will pull out the win unless they seriously muff something. The thing about Nick Chubb missing is we have seen other running backs off and on the years Nick Chubb has been there. And I feel like Nick Chubb has been there for well over 4 years. That's what it seems like. It feels like he just wouldn't leave. But Georgia, the only issue I see they're going to have is the key players like Nick Chubb that they're going to have to replace. But they will, I can say, pull out this.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that this one right here is really a toss-up at all. I think I think this is just going to be a blowout. It's an FCS team versus a college football playoff contender, most likely in Georgia. So I'm going to put this in like the 50s or 60s, and hopefully the backups get some playing time. Game 7 here on prediction. Tennessee Martin versus Missouri at 3 o'clock on the SEC Network alternate channel. Sorry, Missouri, you're on the alternate channel. Tennessee Martin last year went 6-5. They are another FCS team. And then Missouri went 7-6, 4-4. Big key for Missouri, quarterback Drew Lock returns. Chris, break this one down real quick.
The key thing about Missouri here, their quarterback situation is they're in a very good spot when it comes to quarterback. Drew Lock last year was the nation's leading passing touchdown. He was the leader in passing touchdowns last season. And Tennessee Martin haven't seen much of them, but being 6-5 as FCS, they're not going to be able to keep up with Missouri. There's a good chance that Missouri will do more or less the same thing Georgia will be doing to Austin Peay, kind of running up the score and getting back up some playtime.
Yeah, the teams Missouri lose to are good teams who can hold off their offense and score on a very weak defense. However, Tennessee Martin is not going to be slowing down this Missouri offense that has been electric with Drew Lock at quarterback up to this point. I think that this one looks like a basketball score and then a big fat egg. And I think Missouri is going to be pulling this one out. I think it's a shutout for the first game. I do not think Tennessee Martin will even score. And then I think we'll be up in the 70s or 80s like they did to some other teams last year. Eastern Illinois and Arkansas at 3 o'clock on the SEC Network. Eastern Illinois, 6-5 last year, and again another FCS team. Arkansas last year went 4-8, 1-7. They were in the bottom of the SEC West, but they have a new head coach now in Chad Morris. Chris, will you talk just a little bit about Arkansas?
Well, if you look back to Auburn and Gus Malzahn's first season with them, it didn't go that great. There's an adjustment. Well, his first season was pretty good for a first
This is
season.
Arkansas. That was Arkansas State, who Gus Malzahn went to.
No, after at Auburn, Gus Malzahn's season at Auburn. First season at Auburn was all right. Kind of went downhill the next season, and then picked back up this last year. And then it's the new head coach thing. It's really unpredictable, but typically a new head coach going into a season, especially leading a team that went 4-8 last year, 1-7 in their conference, the expectations aren't that high for Arkansas this year, at least from my standpoint. So I feel like it'll be a close game. If not a close game, Eastern Illinois might actually pull out a win against an SEC team.
I'm actually going to have to disagree with you here on 2 points. One, I think that 2013 season for Auburn was really good. Just my own opinion. So says the Kick 6. But anyway, second point, I just think that Arkansas, I agree with you on this. I agree that Arkansas' season this year won't be that great. Just because this is Chad Morris' first year. He doesn't return a lot of skill players at all. And he also he hasn't had a chance to recruit in his own way. And so I think that Arkansas gets a good win over Eastern Illinois. In the long run, though, I don't see them being very successful. Let's talk about West Virginia and Tennessee. This one, I don't feel so good here for the SEC team. It'll be at 2:30 on CBS in Charlotte. West Virginia last year went 7-6, 5-4 in the Big 12, but they do return a lot of guys and a lot of athletes. Tennessee went 4-8 and lost absolutely all of their 8 games in the SEC last year, but they have a new head coach in Jeremy Pruitt. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Looking at Tennessee's record, it is not a good-looking year for them at all. Especially going 4-8 and 0-8 in the SEC means their only 4 wins were likely against smaller teams, maybe from like the Sun Belt Conference, something like that, maybe in some FCS teams. West Virginia has been okay the last 2-3 years. They've had ups and downs. But again, with the new head coach situation, Jeremy Pruitt is likely bringing a new play style, a new scheme to either the offense or defense or both. This change, especially coming off of 4-8 season for Tennessee, is not going to look good, so I'm going to have to side with the Big 12 on this one.
Me too. I think West Virginia, I think they're returning so many people. I think Tennessee doesn't really have the athletes there yet. So I'm going to have to go with West Virginia to pull this one out. Let's talk some more FCS teams with Charleston Southern playing Florida at Florida. It'll at 6:30 on the SEC network. Charleston Southern went 6-5. Again, they're in the FCS. And then Florida went 4-7, 3-5 in the SEC. But they also have a new coach in Dan Mullen from Mississippi State.
A new head coach is all over the SEC. Florida has had a rough couple years, especially since, I know it's been a while, but since Tim Tebow left. and gave them their good run for a couple years. It's not going to be looking good for Florida for the overall season, but I think they can pull out against just Charleston Southern because they don't really have. They're not as athletic as, or like as well rounded as Florida would be this year. So Florida will pull it out, I believe, but it could be a run for their money.
I think this is a game where Florida fans get some hope with a good solid victory against Charleston Southern, the FCS team. I think that just the overall skill that Florida's going to bring is just going to be a good match for Charleston Southern. And I think that Florida fans are going to be screaming redemption after this when they don't necessarily need to. I think this is when Florida fans are going to have to pump the brakes a little bit and wait and see what the rest of the season is going to be like. But I just think the pure talent level that Florida's going to bring is going to be too much for Charleston Southern. So I'm going to agree with you on Florida there. Our next game is Middle Tennessee at Vanderbilt. It's going to be at 6:30 on the SEC Network. Middle Tennessee last year went 7-6, 4-4, and Conference USA, they bring back a lot of experience actually. Vanderbilt last year went 5-7, 1-7 in the SEC. Big story for them. Quarterback Kyle Shermer is coming back, and that's going to be huge for Vanderbilt.
Middle Tennessee's advantage with this game is going to be the amount of experience that they're going to have coming back in from last season. Vanderbilt is going to be getting their quarterback, back this season. He's going to be well into it. He's probably going to be ready to get the season kicked off and ready to go. Middle Tennessee has shown a good level of talent the last year or so, last couple of seasons. But I believe Vanderbilt's going to pull this out because they have proved to be pretty tough. They just haven't been able to quite get that winning drive that they need.
I agree with you there. I think that this is a very toss-up game. And like I said earlier, I wouldn't really blame anyone for picking either side. I think this is one where I'm going to go with an upset. Because I do think Vanderbilt should win. But I think Middle Tennessee is going to pull the upset. I think it'll be close. I will probably be wrong and he will probably be right. But I'm going to go with that. Stephen F. Austin, yet another FCS team, versus Mississippi State at Mississippi State. It'll be at 6:30 on ESPNU. Stephen F. Austin went 4-7. Mississippi State went 9-4, 4-4 in the SEC. Again, they have a new head coach in Joe Moorhead. Chris, what are your thoughts?
New head coach situation, again, it's like I said earlier, it is unpredictable. It could be a good situation for the team, it could be bad. But Mississippi State is going to have a pretty good confidence level after coming off 9-4 with a season. It's all right. It qualifies for a bowl game.
Yeah.
So even if Austin is an FCS team, they're obviously not going to have the best recruitment, so not the best talent that you can find to contend with an SEC team. Will likely be one of the last blowouts we'll see this week, if not the last.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely going to be a Mississippi State starting off on a good note there against Stephen F. Austin with a big win. One of our big three games here, Louisville versus Alabama at 7 o'clock on ABC. This will be played at a neutral site in Orlando, Florida. Louisville last year went 8-5, 4-4 in the ACC. But for them, their big question here in this game is how will they be doing for the first time in a few years without Lamar Jackson at quarterback? For Alabama, they went 13-1, 7-1 in the SEC, and were national champions. Big story for them. Who's going to win their quarterback battle? That's been the hot topic for Alabama all year long. So I think we'll finally get to see it in this game right here come Saturday. Chris, what are your thoughts?
With Lamar Jackson leaving, Heisman Trophy contender, that's going to be a big hit to the offense for Louisville. Alabama, the QB battle, it has been a toss-up for a while now, but I feel like Jalen Hurts is going to end up keeping the position. If not, it'll likely be a rotation type thing where Jalen Hurts will switch in for different quarterback draws or some other routes where he would have to like maybe have some curls or a few deeps, and then if he needs to, scramble. Well, if another quarterback does end up having to step in for Alabama, it's going to be a passing quarterback, one that they can depend on more often to deliver a ball accurately, and that will get them good yards. I feel like Alabama will pull this out just because of Louisville's hit to the offense they're taking losing Lamar Jackson.
I agree. I mean, that's an 8-5, 4-4 record with Lamar Jackson. There's no one really there that we've seen so far who's going to be able to step up and do the same thing as Lamar Jackson. If they weren't able to be overly successful with Lamar Jackson, I think they're going to be even worse without it. I think when they scheduled this game, it was probably a great idea, but now it's just kind of a, Alabama's going to win this one type deal. And so I think Alabama's going to win it. I actually kind of agree with you. I think Tua is that passing quarterback that you're talking about that Alabama is going to want to have. But I do kind of see a rotation there, especially with, I don't think they want Jalen to transfer. So I think they probably have some rotation. And then we get an even longer quarterback battle if that happens. So we'll see how it goes.
One thing I'd have to say about Louisville, some of the best uniforms I've seen.
That is true. Football. Oh, yeah, definitely. All right, last game is going to be played Sunday, September 2nd. Miami, LSU at 6:30 on ABC in Arlington, Texas. Miami last year went 10-3, 7-1 in the ACC. Massive amount of returning starters, lots of experience. They lost in the ACC championship. For a while there, though, they had playoff hopes inside, and then they kind of did a a late season slide. And then LSU went 9-4, 6-2 in the SEC. They were okay. Big question there: who will be the quarterback? Most people expected to be Ohio State transfer Joe Burrow, but that's still a question. So, what are your thoughts?
The quarterback situation for LSU is definitely going to alter either the way they play or how they're playing, depending on who they're going to put up there. And the amount of returners for Miami, along with any confidence that they would have gotten boosted by the 10-3 record last year, along with championship hopes. LSU 9-4 last year, it's good for an SEC team, especially considering they won 6 out of 8 games in the SEC, which is a good record for such a tough conference. However, I might just have to side with Miami in the ACC for this game.
I would have to too, as well. I think that Miami just brings back such sheer numbers, and I think Miami's a little angry because of how last season ended, and I think they're going to take out their vengeance on this LSU team who's trying to look to... I just don't think that LSU has that great of talent coming back. I mean, they lost Darius Guice. They don't have a running back like that anymore. So I just think that Miami's going to overwhelm them with talent and with just pure desire to win. But yeah, that's going to be it for this week's predictions. We'll see how we did come next week. But yes, again, check out more of all kinds of other content on either iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube at SEC Fanatic. There's lots of other stuff. There's more in-depth on each SEC team in last week's episode. And then again, thanks to Chris Willett for coming out here. If you guys want to check out his channel, he does a gaming channel. You want to tell us a little bit about that before we go?
It's really simple, very small channel. Few games up. There's a couple I'm working on at the moment. It's all mobile gaming until I can save up and I can get what I need to make the channel grow bigger and kind of go cross-platform on certain games. But it's Bappo Plays on YouTube. Inspiration came from one of my other favorite YouTubers, or a group of them, Fitz, Smitty, their whole group. That's where the inspiration for the name came from, where their episodes found it absolutely hilarious. Yeah, that's all I can really say about my channel.
All right, well, thank you. And then, again, thank you for coming out here and doing this with me, and I hope you all enjoy, and yeah.